Hi, I'm Nan Simonson, and I am the author of Aging Powerfully. This was my way of saying almost 3 years ago when I had just turned 70 that we all, through lifestyle as medicine, can age for decades longer than most people expect they can by making some lifestyle changes. So I talk about that after I have a bit of a memoir moment in the book where I talk about some of the challenges that I went through and how they were, well, mitigated through decisions and lifestyle. Um, I am at the end of, and I was just talking to the group that meets with me before and then after I do this recorded presentation that goes into YouTube. Um, I was just speaking to them about where we go from here. And we're going to continue to do the PowerPoints. I like the idea of having conversations about PowerPoints that relate to lifestyle as medicine. But we'll talk about that, and you'll find out more about that, hopefully, when I reach out and let you know what I'm going to do and when. But so this is week number 14 of 14, and I'm talking about self-esteem. What is self-esteem? I recently, well, just Sunday, and today is Tuesday, went to a conference, Live Your Best Life conference that Chef AJ put on in her hometown of Sacramento. And Dr. Lisle was there, as was Dr. Goldhammer and Dr. Scheffenberger, and just a wonderful cast of speakers. And he was talking about esteem and self-esteem and what some people call ego. And I wanted to give you the highlights of that talk. The good news is you can find the entire talk because that day it was over an hour, yet you can find this talk online because he had a conversation with the same PowerPoint and the same training points with Gustavo Tolosa, who works with Dr. McDougal, John McDougal. And he had that conversation back in January of 2016. And yet at this conference, when he did this presentation, he said it is one of his favorite conversations, one of his favorite programs. Dr. Doug Lisle is an evolutionary biologist. No, well, evolutionary psychologist. You could say biologist because he's quite familiar with the workings of the human body. He worked with and still continues to collaborate with Dr. Goldhammer at True North as it relates to our biology in health, because Dr. Goldhammer's True North is a place where people go to fast and to get well with either good food or fasting or both. As a matter of fact, I think I think she's made a point to say that Chef AJ is at True North for a couple of weeks, taking advantage of their fabulous program. So what are we going to talk about today? As an evolutionary biologist or evolutionary psychologist, Dr. Lisle focuses on the things we do because they have become imperatives evolutionarily, meaning that a lot of our responses as humans were hardwired into us and through our ancestors evolutionarily so that we could survive. And those who weren't good at those things were the ones that didn't survive. And he describes things that help us understand a little bit better how it is that we come to regard ourselves and how the power we have to enhance that. So I'm going to read my notes rather than even trying to paraphrase because I'll forget too many things. Dr. Lisle speaks of our nature, and this has been derived through our ancestral behavior and imperatives. The point of his talk is to encourage us to do things one step at a time, to do them slowly, not to look for a quick fix, but to become involved in the process. So what is the name of this talk? The Slow, Fast Way. For a steady pace toward goals. And I'm going to include in this recording the link that you can use to watch this. It's really good. And I am only including a small part of what he discussed because I wouldn't have the time to do the entire program. In this talk, he enrolls the analogy of the rabbit and the hare as a way of explaining what his points are. In comparing the rabbit, and he was speaking at that time because that talk that he did with Gustavo had a lot to do with a program that Dr. McDougal was doing for weight loss. And so he was connecting these thoughts to weight loss, and yet I'm not. I'm connecting them to our, I'll use the word behavior, as it stems from self-esteem or lack thereof in any area of our life. But you'll see what I mean in just a minute. In comparing the rabbit and the hare, he uses Dr. Atkins as an example of the rabbit sitting and citing his quick weight loss plan way back in the 90s. He emphasizes that Dr. Atkins' diet and many diets like it have had a huge negative impact on the eating patterns of our country, leading to destructive dietary behavior, which also affected him, Dr. Atkins, as he died of cardiovascular disease. And Dr. Atkins skewed a balanced diet by promoting cutting out carbohydrates, eating fat and proteins as a way to drop weight, which happens very quickly because we lose a lot of water weight when we are eating that way. And appetite is reduced for a while, and some other things that happen. The problem is when people gained their weight back, as soon as they stopped that rigidity, which quite often they did, and they started feeling poorly, the weight came flooding back. What did that do? That had quite an effect on the self-esteem of many people. And I was one of them. I got caught up in all of that. And at the time, well, for decades before and decades afterwards, I had an eating disorder, and this just fueled it. But that's for another talk. He explained that we want to be wearing instead the tortoise's shell, the hare and the tortoise. And he takes us through iterations that represent that, and a little bit more on that later. In other words, he's talking about the progress of the tortoise or the progress of the hare, and which one he most highly recommends, which is a slower, more steady pace. You know, a tortoise, a turtle, is myopic. It sees very little except what's right in front of him. And what he's going is grass clump to grass clump to grass clump, and eventually gets where he's going and gets there steadily, whereas the hare is jackrabbiting to an end result that quite often never remains rewarding for many reasons. As an aside to explaining the procrastination process, which we're not getting into, that's another reason I'll recommend that you watch this presentation. And if you want to look it up, for example, those who are watching this, if you want to look it up, you can find it on your YouTube under Dr. Doug Lisle, The Slow, Fast Way to a Steady Path Toward Goals. And you'll find it. You'll see Gustavo Tolosa and his black glasses and his black hair on the screen initially. And the interview is this one. It's about 58 minutes or something like that. Or just wait for the link that I'll put on the recording. So as an aside to explaining the procrastination process, which again, I won't take time to do, but I encourage you to watch this. He brings up the esteem process, because the esteem process has a lot to do with procrastination. But again, we're not going to cover that because we don't need to make my point, which is what I want to talk about today. Dr. Lisle explains that inside each of us, there are two parts. And if you watch this video, if you watch his presentation, when he does a presentation, he does chicken scribble art, and he's proud of it. So he has this chicken scribble person, and in their head, there's a little oval, and that's cut in half, and that's these two parts. There is you, and then there is your esteem meter, or what he also, well, I'll tell you what we also call it. But in other words, those are our two parts. And you can kind of imagine that. And as I described further, you're going to hear about three factors, general factors, from which we get esteem from the outside that affect us, in other words, that affect you. And then where else we get our interpretations, and that's on the other side. That's part of the esteem meter, and that's part of the internal audience, and that's the most important thing that we're going to talk about today. But we'll get there. So he explains that there are two parts. He labels them you, and the other is the esteem meter. On one side, we watch and we listen to the feedback that we get from others to tell us that we are valued by the words they say, the things that they do to and for us, how they treat us. And we watch for this, we listen for it, we value it. The esteem meter, on the other hand, and on the other side, monitors what's going on and tries to keep us protected by keeping us encircled by those who give us reassuring feedback. Largely, our happiness has been guided by what's going on with our esteem meter and how that is influenced by those around us. Esteem is valued, and it was a primary currency in the Stone Age environment. So it's built into us. And it is something that is an evolutionary response. Ego is a word that we're all familiar with, and it's another word for esteem or esteem meter. How many of us have been praised and we say to ourselves, either to ourselves or out loud, "Thank you, that was good for my ego." We are fed by a lot of what happens on an exterior basis. In this talk, he explained why people will stop doing their best because of this dynamic of praise or ego boosting, and for the sake of self-protection. He's coined this the ego trap, and it's an important concept, but again, not within the scope of our talk. In other words, how some people will actually undercut and undermine their forward progress because of their fear of losing esteem. But again, you can watch the video and you'll understand that much more fully. In his presentation, Dr. Lisle has created that diagram and explained, as I said, those three categories of exterior motivation, and they are: number one, our mates; number two, our friends; and number three, the trade. And these are his definitions. Why isn't family there? Because we don't have to go out of our way usually to get the basic love of our family. It's those that we tend to be most focused on getting reinforcement from. And yet In some ways, I would say add family to that too. But the point is that we are anxious for and in need of reinforcement and are motivated by the opinions of those around us. He explains that we rehearse, he uses the word rehearse, in other words, prepare in ways that we can and that feel that we need to get positive reinforcements from those groups. We prepare by shopping for the right clothes, whether it's for our job, our trade, to impress our friends, to find a new mate. What we do to prepare, we usually run through an analysis of how this will affect those that are in our life and how that will then affect us and give us our esteem meter, what we need, and that is reinforcement. The things we do and learn are also those things that we can put out there to the world to help us gain esteem. Just about everything we do, we run through that esteem meter. On the other side of this is the internal audience, and that is what I want to emphasize today. Our internal audience looks at our efforts to please others based on how well we've done. Our esteem meter is a proxy for those three external forces that we try so hard to influence. So you have an internal audience, you have an esteem meter that is guiding us in things that we do. And yet, our point today is to look at what we can do to progress, to gain power over our own motivations without it running through somebody else, their good opinions or their bad opinions. As he shows in the diagram that I've described, us in the middle, those three, or if you want to add family, four general categories, the esteem meter, and then our internal audience, which is always watching. If you've ever listened to Dr.Lisle do a presentation, he says, as it relates to a number of our actions, our internal audience is always watching. You may think that what you're doing or not doing that you mean to doesn't matter, but the internal audience is always watching. And that internal audience, I'm jumping ahead now, is where we can gain most of our feelings of worth and value and esteem. Okay. As he shows in that diagram that I've just described, and you'll see it on his PowerPoint, our internal audience is this group of little people, and he actually has these little stick figures of these little people who are giving us feedback on all that we do. So they're the actual feedback from real life, and then our internal audience as it relates to our constant thoughts and our constant evaluation of who and what we think we are, quite often coming from other people. This is the lens that we view nearly everything we do through and that we use to judge. We also have an esteem meter that's watching our behavior and judging what we do. This internal audience is, as I said, never not watching. Just a minor note about procrastination, because I mentioned it earlier. It can come about if our interpretation of expectations of others is so high that we believe we can't match it. He used the example of, well, a kid playing a piano that his mother is certain is of the value and of the excellence that would get him into Carnegie Hall, and she keeps telling him that, and then he hears somebody else who, with less experience, can play circles around him and realizes maybe he's not Carnegie Hall material, and instead of trying harder because he realizes that this isn't anything he's ever going to accomplish to the degree that his mother is expecting it, he simply stops trying. And that's the procrastination. That's part of our ancestral interpretation of options that we are imbued with even now. With procrastination, we never have to come face to face with that self-doubt. We can simply stop trying. If the internal audience sets the bar too high, the self freezes under these expectations, and we may do what it can to protect us from falling short of our own expectations through procrastination. We're the only creature in existence that's capable of this, that we will stop our own advancement to protect self. Dr. Lisle sees this as simply another adaptive instinct of human animal, like hunger and thirst and natural avoidance of prey. He gets deeper into that as he describes it again in his video. Dr. Lisle uses another example of the quick fix when he mentions Slim Fast and their enticing slogan, "Give us a week and we'll take off the weight." He said that explains a lot about what people have gone through in terms of yo-yo dieting and in terms of believing that there's another way around taking our directives step by step and building our self-esteem as we go without it coming from external motivators. He explains how physiologically that particular product would bring quick results, allow people to think, and those results weren't real, and he tells what he means by that, allowing people to think that they have accomplished something that is immediately undone the first time that they try to go back to I'll use the word natural way of eating. And what that did to esteem, he said, was very chronically seen across the country: yo-yo dieting, self-doubt, and in many cases, disordered eating, continuing to try to grab the carrot instead of simply learning a better way through self-guided motivation. Again, another example of quick fixes that will damage self-esteem. The right way is the hare's way, the step-by-step way, the slower way to accomplish what we're going for. The tortoise's shell is hardened against criticism and expectations of others and geared toward the internal audience. He labels the quick fix, easy way, and sometimes misguided influences of others the hare's highway. In other words, our misconceptions about what we should be doing to get acclaim, acknowledgement, praise, and success based on a quick fix, the hare's highway, and the slower, better, self-guided way, the tortoise's trail. As it relates to goals, and he is primarily talking about weight, he suggests that we become myopic like the turtle and look at one goal in front of us at a time. He is the one that had a lot to do with Chef AJ's ultimate weight loss. It was 50 or 60 pounds, and it took her 2.5 years to do it. But she took it off and she kept it off because he encouraged her. He was actually working with her to take it one step at a time. And he actually has a very basic graphic that he used as a directive, but it has everything to it has everything to do with the McDougal program, which is a starch-based program, and one that actually I espouse: whole food plant-based, which is starch heavy, whole food plant-based starch, in other words, not refined starch. That's a whole other subject as well. As it relates to weight loss, he offers some guidelines and emphasizes that progress is what we're aiming for, not perfection. So this is the essence of what I want to say. Focus most on self-esteem rather than the esteem of others, depending on what goal you're going for, be it weight loss, more movement, better personal habits, learning a new skill, whole food plant-based, or whole foods added to an existing diet, or going on whole food plant-based exclusive pattern, which is what I did 5 years ago. We can build our own esteem by the actions that we take. Everything that we do moves us toward our goal. Every time we check a box in pursuit of progress, it's noticed by our internal audience and it raises our esteem meter. Progress or compliance regarding our intentions in everything we do, our internal audience applauds. He likens this to when we go to school, when we're getting a degree. We don't do it 4 years at a time, 6 years at a time, instantly. If we look ahead too far, it can be overwhelming. Instead, people tend to break it down subject by subject, class by class, quarter by quarter, year by year, until, with their head down at the task given, until they get where they want to go. And that's the way he sees that we build our esteem. It affects our internal audience, that builds esteem. That esteem defines us and gives us power against all odds. His final words are that you don't have to be perfect. If, as we progress, he says, we hit even 80% of our targets at any given time, that's how we will eventually get the life that we deserve. And his final slide on his talk is fireworks. So how does this play out? What are we talking about here? I know that since I've have begun listening to Dr.Lisle, that I've been taken by the visual of the internal audience, and it has become something that I am always striving to influence, knowing that without even having his stick figures in my mind, but now I'm going to have his little stick figures. Maybe I'll even create a bleacher for them. Anything that I do that is taking me toward a goal. For example, I believe for me, and keep in mind, I was a binge eater. I could eat from one fast food restaurant to another 3 or 4 meals. I was also bulimic, and that could go on all day long. In other words, it was an awful way to live. And I worry that some people would think, oh, how perfect. You get to do what I want to do, eat, and then just keep eating and eating and eating. No, it wasn't. You don't taste food when you do that. You do it with such a unconscious desire for joy, but a conscious desire just to not feel for real, that it's an ugly way to live. And yet I couldn't escape it until I went whole food, plant-based, and understood through a book I read, Brain Over Binge, that I could control the urges. And once I controlled the urge and I had the food to nourish me, I was able to stop. I looked at the process of that, and it was a process of about 3 months. Well, to stop the binging, it was even less than that, but going fully plant-based from the time I decided was about 3 months. But I look at every little step. So what I was going to say is, for me, I like the idea of eating 3 meals a day, spaced out 4 or 5 hours. Why? Because I became very well versed in the migrating motor complex. That's our bodies, and I like this analogy of rotor-rooter. That's our body's rotor-rooter system. Write that down. Migrating motor complex. It'll tell you the body between 2 to 3 or 4 hours after a meal has this pulsation that moves food through us and finishes digesting and doing some bodily functions that it needs no food around to take care of. Some people never stop eating and never have that process. And it has been found, and this is ancestral as well, people didn't eat constantly, that going, unless somebody has, well, even low blood sugar, can very well be maintained with a good, solid, whole food meal for 4 or 5 hours. That doesn't matter. But my point is that I decided not to snack. In other words, snacking was usually because I was bored. I also learned that a lot of people think that they should eat because they feel hungry when really they're just thirsty. They are dehydrated. They think that it's hunger, that feeling of slight anxiety, and really it's just thirst. So I've learned that I don't want to snack. Well, sometimes when making a meal, sometimes when doing a video and there's food all over, it doesn't mean I won't take a bite and taste it, but usually I don't. And when I don't, it's gone as far as me picking something up, and this is something I do out of camera range. So this is my funny little guy. Where's his face? That I use to build my hand strength. As we get older, we need to keep our hand strength. So that's what I'm showing you. But I'm about to pick something up and take a bite or taste it, and I'll put it down. You know who's watching? My internal audience. When I wake up and I think, well, you know what, I deserve to just stay in and just read for a while. I'll say to myself, I'll know that I would prefer to do my stretches in bed, which I do every morning, and that I will never regret getting my shoes on after putting on my running outfit. I don't run anymore, I walk. Or cycle. I cycle 4 days a week. The rest is walking, about an hour in the morning and then a half an hour in the evening. And I do that. What have I just done? I've just gotten my internal audience into a flag waving celebration. Every little thing we do. I went to a dentist once and he said, you know, people don't floss right. They take the floss and they just kind of throw it in the middle of the whole thing and take it out, and the next tooth and the next tooth. He said to properly floss, you go up and down the sides of each tooth 3 to 4 times. Well, when I do that, because he told me to, because I want to have teeth when I'm 90, I'm not sure I will, but I think I will. And I floss properly both morning and evening. Who's watching? My internal audience. So I could go on and on. You go on and on. Think about the things you do that you could just as easily have sidestepped, just as easily have made excuses for, or the things that you do that are habitual that you don't even think about. But now that you know that audience is there, that have affected you and your self-esteem, or any little subterfuge things that you've done that without even meaning to have pulled down your self-esteem. Why? Because that audience knows that wasn't in your best interest. Do you see where I'm going with this? So I'll leave you with this. You have an internal audience. We do. You have an esteem meter that is affected by the outside. But if you're that turtle with the shell and you're focused on you, but the you that's affected by your audience, your esteem meter that you can control, you can make decisions all day long. Little decisions, and he talks about this, little decisions, each one of which will build your internal audience's excitement and pride and determination. Your esteem meter will register and you will walk straighter, head higher, and feelings of pride that can keep you like Teflon away from other things that come by you and try to pull you down. I went through decades and decades of shameful behavior, and I never knew what it was like to feel that there were no secrets that I was ashamed of. And now I feel free enough to feel very proud of how I live my life and how I behave. Not as good as I want to be someday, but that's not a criticism. That is an imperative. In other words, that's purpose. But with pride about who I am because of the things that I've done to live where I am now. That was a step-by-step decision. And now I understand that I've got some bleachers off to the side with little stick figure people waving their flags that have affected me because that esteem meter, that ego in the good way, has been fed. That's all I have to say about it. So I am going to continue the PowerPoints, points of interest as they relate to lifestyle as medicine. This is all about that. And I have to get more information as to how I'm going to do the next ones. But if this list that I send reminders to is still valid, and I believe it should be, even though it's dated out, because this was the last one, you'll get a reminder that I'll be on next week with whatever subject comes up. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it meant something to you. I hope you have a great day, because I know I'm going to. Thank you for joining me. All right. Bye-bye.